welcome, croeso, to this session about COP26 and Wales. My name is Chris Wheeler. I'm the Deputy Director for Climate Change and Fuel Poverty in the Welsh Government, and I also have the pleasure and privilege of leading on COP26 in Wales for the Welsh Government. The agenda for today is I'm going to give you a bit of a sort of overview of what we know so far about COP26 and Wales, but I'm going to be joined by a couple of colleagues. First of all, Paul, who'll ask to introduce himself now. We'll be talking about his experience at COP26. Paul, would you like to say hello? Oh, we may have a technical issue with Paul. I'm sure he'll be back later on. And I'll also be joined by colleagues from the UK government. Ashley, perhaps you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay on the phone. Ashley Gray, I'm one of the Deputy Directors in the COP unit in the Cabinet Office. I'm particularly interested in engagement across all parts of the UK in COP.
Fantastic, thanks Ashley. We'll be taking questions and comments throughout to the chat bar. If you see something you like, then please do use the little thumb icon. We'll make sure we focus on those questions first when we get to the end of the session. If you want to tell us about something that's not COP, that's okay, but we're trying to focus today on COP26 and on Wales at COP26. If you want to ask us wider questions, you can do, but we probably will not put them through the moderator net onto the chat bar that everybody can see. We'll just save them and review them later on. So it is a COP focus session today, and we'll be looking to stay on topic, at least because we don't have a huge amount of time. Do feel free to ask questions throughout, and we'll get to them after the presentations. So then I'll start with Wales and COP26. Have the next slide, please. While you read the text on the slide, it is a little bit busy. I wanted to just bring out a couple of points for you. COP26 rather, is the 26th meeting of the UN Climate Change Conference of Parties. That's what COP stands for, and it's going to be held in Glasgow this year in November. Around 30,000 people tend to turn up to COP events when they've been held over the years, so it's one of the biggest summits in the world. It's the biggest international summit the UK will ever have hosted if it goes ahead at that scale. Some question marks around that, we'll come back to that later. But it really aims to bring together people from all parts of the world and all kind of parts of society, from heads of state all the way to young people and everybody in between. It is based at country level, and that's from a sort of UN perspective. So the UK government are the lead party to the UN process, and the Welsh government tends to attend COP as part of the UK government delegation. But this highlights the really important role of state and regional governments in delivery of actions to tackle the climate change agenda. This really builds on the COP that was held in Paris in 2015. And I know that Paul later on is going to give a bit more history around the kind of COP process and how we got to where we are today. But essentially, Paris was a big landmark binding international moment on climate change. 196 parties signed up to a treaty in COP21 in Paris. That was on the 12th of December 2015. There were a handful of really important points that I want to emphasise because they really shape what COP26 is going to be all about. The first is the goal to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. That's probably the headline that you read before. But you might not have seen that the additional goal was to get global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. So there was recognition back in Paris that you can't sort of click your fingers and emissions will start to decline. They need to peak as soon as possible so they can start to fall. And it was a landmark in a sort of multilateral climate change process because the first time it brought all those nations together in a common cause. Next slide, please. The things that Paris identified, kind of three big ones, were all about the ambition gap. The first one is about those tons of carbon dioxide, tons of greenhouse gas emissions I mentioned a moment ago. The red line on this slide speaks to the current policies that are in place kind of across the world to get rid of or to tackle climate change. The grey line's NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and they express the ambition of countries. So if the grey line is what people say they'll do, the red line is what they're on track to actually do. The dark line with 2 degrees at the end demonstrates the amount of reduction of emissions you need to see to get to a 2 degrees scenario. And the lowest line at 1.5 degrees is the reduction you need to see to get to 1.5 degrees. you will note that there's some pretty significant gaps on that chart. And a lot of what the UK presidency of COP is about is trying to meet some of those gaps and try and get both the ambition but also the action to be much more aligned with the blue lines rather than where they are on this chart. Next slide, please. Another significant challenge is around finance. In Paris, they talked about mobilising $7 trillion every year, with the majority going to developing countries. And within that, there was 100 billion a year that's supposed to be mobilised to go to developing countries in particular. It's not as far off as the emissions, but it's still a pretty big gap. And a large part of this COP26 is going to be about mobilising finance. And you'll see that in the themes and campaigns that we'll get to in just a moment. Finally, there was an ambition from Paris about adaptation and resilience. Climate change is happening now. We see floods, we see wildfires, we see more and more extreme weather events. And it was about how communities across the world adapt and are resilient in the face of that climate change. It needs to be a balanced and negotiated package. It does need to build on Paris. And of course, we all recognise that this is not just a government thing anymore. There's a huge amount of public concern and concern from business and industry as well. Finally, worth making the point that in the context of a COVID recovery, there are both enormous risks and enormous opportunities, I think, as we look to COP26 and how we manage a recovery back from the global pandemic that we've been living through over the last 18 months or so. Next slide, please. So it's actually a joint UK-Italy presidency, which doesn't often get mentioned all that much, but it is a joint presidency, albeit it'll be held in Glasgow. As I said, postponed from 2020. There are 5 themes which the UK government are pushing in COP26. You see them there: adaptation and resilience, nature-based solutions, energy transitions, clean transport, and finance. Many of these link to key UK government policies that have come out over the last year or so. For example, clean transport and the commitment by the UK government to phase out petrol and fossil fuel vehicles. And also on nature-based solutions, where where across the UK, people are taking, or the governments are really wanting to push those sorts of answers to a lot of the questions that we've been asking. Largely, they reinforce Paris, I would say, and hopefully they make some sense to people on this call. They certainly make sense to me. Next slide, please. Within that, the UK government have announced sort of 4 main aims and objectives. Again, having just gone through the kind of Paris context, these should make sense. They start to sound familiar. They want to secure net zero by mid-century, keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. They need to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, mobilise finance in the way I've just described, and importantly, work together to deliver. I think this is a really important theme for Wales, where we realise that Welsh government on its own can't tackle climate change. It's not a sort of magic wand that we hold. If we're going to do this, we need everybody to come together from all different sectors of society. Next slide, please. And building on that, I want you to spend a moment talking about Wales objectives. We have 5, but if I could underline, bold, highlight, and make jump out from the slide, I would put up the very first one: catalyse action at home and abroad. We generally do it abroad through coalitions and through sharing and learning, making the most of a sort of collective power. But it's also really important we catalyse action at home. This is a year when Wales will publish its net zero strategy. We're going to do that around the time of COP. It'll be Wales's contribution to meeting that first main objective, the 1.5 degrees. And it's really important that that's not just a government-led thing. It's an all Wales thing. So catalysing action for everyone to be part of that is really important to us. Of course, we want to share and learn, and we'll come back to that in just a second. We want to show the world we're a globally responsible nation, raise our profile, and also look to trade. And that's all captured as part of our international strategy and build on our Prosperity for All, a low carbon Wales, which is our last emissions reduction strategy. Next slide, please. Within this, we've been thinking about what our USP might be. These are ideas only. This is not a set in stone slide, just to sort of get their digestive juices going in your mind. But we thought about what does Wales do that's different? What can we say in a global marketplace, a very busy global marketplace at COP, that sounds different to what everyone else is saying, or where we have a genuine story of success to tell, or some real lessons that we think will add value to others? These are our ideas. We're the only country in the world to have embedded the UN Sustainable Development Goals and legislation through our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And of course, we went from being one of the worst in the world to being sort of third top when it comes to waste and recycling. Our global nature-based solutions speak for themselves. Clearly, we've done some really interesting work on innovative housing. And of course, as a sort of nation at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, we've got a story to tell about transitioning from coal. Particularly, I think, when so many other countries are still reliant on coal as one of the main parts of their energy networks. And we, of course, have just closed our last coal-fired power station. We are open to other ideas. If you have them, please do drop them into the chat bar. As I said, this is just a draft slide where we're trying to think through our ideas and work out how we can really be heard in what's a very busy marketplace at COP. Next slide, please. So how can you get involved? Well, as you'll see on the slide, there's a blue zone and a green zone, which are really the main parts of the COP summit. The blue zone is a UN managed space which hosts the negotiations themselves. So where all the countries will be sitting down to hammer out who's doing what to stop global warming. Everyone who goes into the blue zone has to be accredited by the UNFCCC. There's more detail about that on their website. And it will include a UK pavilion. And if you've got questions about that, I'm sure Ashley will be happy to handle those at the end of the session. Although I understand work on that pavilion is still going forward and is still very much in development. There are also sponsors of COP. People like NatWest, National Grid, Sky, Scottish Power, Sainsbury's, GSK. They're all listed on the COP website. And of course, they'll have access to different parts of the summit and have platforms to talk about their products, their ideas, and their own journeys to net zero and to climate resilience. Access to all of these is through the UN, the UK government, or other participants. And that's why we thought it would be helpful to have Paul along, assuming we've resolved the technical difficulties, to tell us about his experience of both getting involved in the summit and what he's got from it. The green zone is also of interest. It's managed by the UK government and it's a platform for everyone who's not a government, essentially, to come along and have their voices heard. There was a stakeholder competition, if you like, an expression of interest process, which opened in March and closed in May. And we understand there were around 40 applications from Welsh stakeholders, and they should know by now if they are through to the next round of that process. If you are on this call and you were not successful, then we hopefully will be able to involve you in COP Cymru, which I'll come to in just a moment's time. Next slide, please. So how else can you get involved? Well, as mentioned, these expressions of interest process, which if you've got questions about, I'm sure Ashley is happy to help with. We had a limited role, I guess, in managing that process, although we're working very closely with our UK government colleagues. So once we know the outcome of that, I guess there'll be more to say. There are also UN competitions. The UN like to find good examples, clever examples, innovative examples of what's gone well and showcase those. And they run competitions from time to time where you can apply, get through and hopefully join in COP, demonstrating your excellent credentials. There's also the Fringe. Now, I think of this as a bit like the Edinburgh Fringe and the big festival up in Scotland, where it's not really part of the formal event. It's not blue zone, it's not green zone. It's just the rest of the city. And you'll find that umbrella organisations, coalitions, companies, organisations, youth groups, civil society groups will hire venues and have their own events. So they're part of the atmosphere, they're there, but they're not part of the UN bit. And that, to be honest, is one of the biggest bits of COP, is this sort of fringe event. And again, I'd really recommend, and I'm sure if Paul is able to join us, he can talk about how to access that sort of fringe feel and be part of that too. You can pledge to be part of Wales's future. I mentioned earlier we're launching our net zero strategy, and as part of that we're hoping to capture pledges from all sorts of people and from all sorts of places across Wales about how you can contribute to our net zero pathway. They'll all go into our net zero plan, which will be our kind of contribution to the COP objectives. So if you do want to pledge to be part of that, we'll send a link around after this session. Or perhaps we'll put actually the pledge in the chat bar, I think. I'm looking at my moderator here. If you want to add a pledge, we'll make sure that's available to you. And we'd love to have your commitment as part of our plan. And finally, you can join in COP Cymru, which I mentioned a moment ago. So let's go to that side now. So COP Cymru is a fancy name for the annual Wales Climate Conference. 2 years ago, we had 300 people come in person to Cardiff. We had sessions from ministers, from Extinction Rebellion, from local government and from a range of other people. And it was a really, really excellent event. Last year in the COVID pandemic, that didn't seem like such a great idea. So we held a virtual climate week. We had 5 days of virtual events covering all different sorts of themes, from civil society through to power, through to public sector, transport. We had a great number of sessions run by lots of different people, and it was a real success. They're both held in November, so this is about the same time as COP26. and it really is a big part of our All Wales effort to tackle the climate emergency. There's more detail being worked up over the summer, partly as the situation with the pandemic becomes clearer. We really want to build on the last 2 years, but we have questions for you as well. And after today's session, we'll try and send out a link to a survey, which we'd like to do, to hear what you want to see at COP Cymru. If you have any questions or ideas today, we're happy to hear them. Our questions are things like, do you think it should be a government-led event, or do you think it should be all Wales-led? Do you think it should be in person, or do you think it should be virtual? Do you think it should happen before COP, or at the same time as COP, or perhaps afterwards, building on the legacy that we'd like to establish? And what do you want to see? Do you want to look at government engagement on policies and action, or do you rather sort of deep dives into sectors, emission sectors like transport or power? Would you rather tackle cross-cutting issues like behavioural change and a just transition? Do you want to hear what others are doing? There's lots and lots of things we could do. And we could probably have enough content to run on for months and months and months, but we probably need to focus COP Cymru into something a little bit shorter. So we're really interested in what's most important to you. As I say, that survey will be sent out through all of our normal channels I think tomorrow or perhaps early next week following this meeting. And we're really keen to hear those ideas, so do watch out for that. In terms of next steps, hopefully next slide, please. As I said, the EOI process is ongoing. We hope to have clarity very soon on kind of what the proposals are that are being worked up, what kind of space they'll have at COP, what kind of platform, and therefore who is going in. That I think will really help us to understand the Welsh presence. We're also seeking clarity in the UK Pavilion, which is again an important platform for all the nations of the UK, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. And we hope to have that in the kind of coming weeks and months, but these things will take time, so we'll share information as we have it. We'll continue to develop COP Cymru, as I just discussed, and working with our coalition partners. One of the most important coalitions for Wales is the Under 2 coalition, which brings together some 220 governments, representing 1.3 billion people worldwide and around 43% of the global economy. So states and regions might be kind of small players, but when you all come together, it does add up to something quite significant. And the Under 2 coalition has been sort of instrumental in pushing forward quite ambitious targets when it comes to climate change over the last few years, and hopefully we'll do the same at COP26. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll finish on the point of our net zero plan development. It's a really big moment for Wales when we sort of explain how we're going to meet our new net zero targets. They were laid in the Senedd in March, and I really hope that everyone on the call feels they can contribute to that plan development, which will be really the sort of Welsh national contribution to COP, where we sort of say this is what we're going to do and this is how we are going to shoulder our global responsibility for managing the climate emergency and for bringing our emissions down. I think that's the end of my slides. I'm just going to check with my moderator to see if we do have Paul on the line and available. It looks like we're still having technical problems. So if I stop there, if we do have Paul, we will come back to him. But for now, perhaps if I open the floor to any questions, then we will move on to sort of Q&A session. Let's see what we've got. So Alex has asked, Ashley, a question for you, if that's all right. What role do you see for the public sector in the UK in relation to COP26? Ashley, perhaps you could give us your thoughts on the role of the public sector at COP.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Alex, for the question. Sorry, I slightly choked myself on some water. So a bit of work.
Oh no!
Sorry, hear me properly. That's why. Thanks for your question, Alex. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of delivering the ambition on global net zero, and as Chris set out in terms of the 4 goals that we have established for COP, from a UK government perspective, certainly all sectors of the economy have an important role to play in meeting those ambitious targets. In terms of, I'm not sure if your question is about kind of in terms of opportunities at COP, which I think in terms of kind of attendance at the event, which I think Chris has set out in terms of where we're at on those in terms of the expressions of interest exercise and some of the other opportunities that exist for those who've not been successful or who've not applied through that process. I don't know if that answers your question. Happy to, if I've not answered your question, let me know. Yeah, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ashley. Another one for you, I'm afraid, from an anonymous questioner who asks that Climate Camau has been shortlisted for the Green Zone, which is fantastic news. They're wondering if they know when they'll get final confirmation, and also if anyone else from Wales has been shortlisted for a place in the Green Zone. Again, actually, I can't answer that question, but I wondered if you might have some insight to offer our anonymous questioner.
Great. Well, first of all, I mean, that's great news and congratulations on being shortlisted for the Green Zone. Oh, sorry, I think there's a slight delay between the video and the, so that's great news. We had a very large number of applications for spaces in the Green Zone, so that is a great outcome. I understand that colleagues in the COP unit are working with those who have been shortlisted. There will be, I'm afraid I don't have the date for exactly when kind of you will hear about the next stage, but I'm sure that members of the COP unit are in contact. If you're not in contact with the COP unit, let me know and I can make sure that you're connected up with the right person. I don't know the question about other stakeholders from Wales at this point. I will check and find out for you.
Great. Ashley, if you can feed that information back to us, if Anonymous wants to get in touch with us directly, then we can pass that information on, assuming it's okay to do so. Thanks, Ashley. Yep. Claire's got a question next. Can we hear more about how the ambition to increase exports does not conflict with decarbonisation? It's a really good question. And the short answer is there is no way to be 100% sure. One of the ways I'd be interested to explore, I think, is around the consumption emissions versus production emissions argument. While clearly our net zero plan is aligned to the greenhouse gas inventory, which tackles production emissions, where Wales is producing products, where it's generating things in a much lower carbon way than perhaps some of our near neighbours, then it's often more carbon efficient to generate things in that way and to export them, rather than have them made in a very high carbon way overseas. But of course, it's a really complicated question, and it's something we should absolutely bear in mind. I don't think there is any sort of simple answer to that question, but I think it is nuanced and complex. Rob has asked, is it desirable to sign up to Race to Zero ahead of COP26? I certainly think so. So something I didn't mention in the presentation, I was very conscious of the time, is that Race to Zero is really quite a large part of COP26 when it comes to sort of states and regions and subnational countries. The Race to Zero it's kind of what it sounds like. It's like a club that if you have committed to net zero, then you get to join up. And the idea is that as we get closer to COP, more and more and more states, regions, even businesses, organisations can sign up to the Race to Zero, building momentum and managing that ambition gap I showed on that earlier slide to be much, much smaller. Wales is looking into joining the Race to Zero now. We have legal targets. We are sort of eligible, and we hope to be able to make some kind of announcement on that in the future. But clearly, that will be subject to a whole bunch of processes, paperwork, and of course, ministerial sign-off. So yes, it is desirable. If you are listening and you are interested, then just Google Race to Zero. Nigel Topping is the UK high-level champion. It's his baby, and he's really, really keen to build that momentum. I think it's a great idea. So thank you, Rob, for the question. Sam asks, who is organising COP Cymru? Can you contact me? I think the thing is, if you can contact us, actually, we'll make a note of your email address though and reach out. That's managed through my team, albeit, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot going on with developing a net zero strategy that has to cover the entirety of the economy and an all Wales plan, alongside COP26 and COP Cymru. But we're trying to make a plan so that goes all very smoothly. And of course, we're happy to talk to anyone who's happy to talk to us. So we will reach out. But in general, if you are interested in being part of COP Cymru, then the standard mailbox that we put out, the decarbonisation one, is probably the best way to get in touch. Another anonymous question now. Can you say more about how people can contribute to the net zero delivery plan? Absolutely. Let us know what your pledge is that we talked earlier. I'm sure the moderator is going to pop a link in the chat bar for you to give us your pledge. If not, again, we'll send that out afterwards from the same place you hopefully got this link from. So there'll be a number of things to follow up on. But essentially, anything you are doing that's in the sort of net zero agenda. Now, if you're a business or a company, that might be that you pledge to get to net zero by 2040 or by 2030 or by 2050. And if you are, then that's great. We'd like to know if that covers scope 1, scope 2 or scope 3 emissions. So whether it's just your sort of direct emissions, or whether you're looking more deeply into your supply chain. Clearly, these are important points when we think about decreasing our carbon emissions. We're also interested in low carbon heroes. This is something we launched last year. You can look up on Twitter. And that was about sort of local individuals who really are sort of climate leaders in their own right. And we're looking for those who can demonstrate and sort of role model how to live a lower carbon lifestyle, whether that's shopping more locally, reducing and reusing and recycling, whether that's sort of gardening more, whether it's planting trees, whether it's walking rather than taking the car, all the things that we all know are good things to do to minimise our impact on the environment and get emissions down. As I say, we'll send that link out. If you are in a particular sector, so say you're in the agricultural sector or the business sector or industrial sector, then hopefully you're already in touch with colleagues across Welsh Government who are leading on the sector-specific delivery plans, and they have a variety of engagement methodologies with their stakeholders. Clearly there's different approaches in different areas, but they, I'm sure, will be pleased to hear from you with your ideas or with your commitment. Owen Roberts asks us, a potential idea for a distinctive theme. Wales has among the most sustainable and low-intensity livestock agriculture in the world. High-profile issue in which we could show leadership. Great idea. Let's make a note of that, and we'll take that away. Thank you. Jonathan asks from the Future Generations Commission. Thank you so much for such a clear outline. We've been shortlisted for a side event. Oh, congratulations! That's fantastic, Jonathan. And we're very keen to support COP Cymru, generate pledges in public bodies and businesses. Happy to chat more. Superb. As always, a pleasure to hear from Future Generations Commissioner Office, and really well done for getting through. Questions coming in thick and fast. Okay, Paul, could Wales lead the way in switching from personalised transport? E-vehicles involve significant finite raw materials and feed the demand for deep ocean mining for mineral nodules. A massive switch towards electric buses, light rail, trams, personalised transport only compounds old issues by asking renewable tech to emulate old carbon tech. It's a really interesting question, and not something I know a huge amount about. Where I sit in the Welsh Government means I sort of know a little bit about lots of things rather than a lot about anything in particular. I don't know, perhaps Ashley, do you think this links to the UK campaign on sort of cleaning up transport and the transport campaign that the UK Government's been keen to push? Do you think Paul's point is relevant there?
Yes, I mean, I think it's potentially a good link into, as you say, what we're doing in terms of the transport campaign, kind of greening transport. I have to confess, like you, Chris, I'm not an expert on the detailed policy, so it sounds like an interesting suggestion, but I would have to defer to others.
We can certainly make a note of it and pass it on to our transport colleagues. So a good question to start a debate, but I'm afraid we don't have the qualified people on the call to take it too much further today, although we will make a note of it and pass it to our transport decarb colleagues. I know Lucy's put links to the survey in the chat bar, which is fantastic. Please do fill in the pledges, let us know what you're up to or what you plan to do. We'd love to include your contribution in our plan. This is not just about government, it really is about everybody playing their part, and where we can capture that, we'd be really delighted to do so. Oh, Ashley, Alex has come back. I think he was very grateful for your answer, but wanted a little bit more specificity. So he's asked, thanks Ashley, it wasn't specifically about attendance, more about what the COP unit sees as the role for public sector, if any, in terms of how they can use COP26 as an opportunity to demonstrate ambition, or he understands that COP works for other sectors from colleagues. He understands how COP works for other sectors from colleagues who've been involved directly in previous COPs, but doesn't really know how the UK government is using COP as an opportunity for the public sector in the UK. And actually, just to note, actually, someone else has asked, what is the best way for local authorities to get involved in COP26? So perhaps, actually, if you could give the UK government view on those questions, which I think are probably linked, that would be really helpful.
Sure, thanks, Chris. I'm going to pick up with my colleagues who lead on some of these areas. I think one of the areas that might be of interest to Alex in particular is the Together for Our Planet campaign, which is our domestic climate change campaign, and we're looking to work with sectors across the economy on delivery of certain aspects of that kind of public-facing communications campaign. I know that we have been talking to some aspects of the public sector. It's probably best, Alex, I'm happy to kind of take your details, or you pass me through Chris and get in touch and have a more detailed conversation once I have brought in the right colleagues. I think in terms of local authorities, again, as Chris set out, there are a number of opportunities available now that the expressions of interest exercise has closed around the COP Fringe, around events that Glasgow City Council are organising, and also in relation specifically to Wales, to the events that Chris has been speaking about. We are engaging with mayors, some of the metro mayors, and we have been COP President chaired a regular meeting with leaders and mayors of a number of councils around the UK. Again, I'm happy to put you in touch with the relevant colleagues who will be able to say more. Thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. I think really good questions about kind of local authorities and engagement. Of course, if you think local authorities should have a place at COP Cymru, then when we send out our survey, please do let us know. We're really, really interested to hear what you want to see and what you would find most helpful. So perhaps there's a public sector element to bring out through COP Cymru, and then perhaps it can feed into COP26 that way as well. Just a thought, if that does sort of strike a chord with you, then do let us know when that survey link becomes available. I think we are not very far away from confirming the link, but again, just a minor technical hitch for today, and we wanted to make sure it was totally ironed out and wrinkle-free before sharing it with all of you. There are a couple of hundred people on the call, so you can understand we wanted to get it right before going too far. Okay, a couple more questions have come in. Is there a list of organisations that have been selected to take part in COP26? Ashley might want to add to this, I'll come to her in a moment, but I think the list of sponsors, the GSKs, the National Grid, Scottish Power, Sainsbury's, Sky, all those sorts of sponsor organisations are listed on the website for COP26, so you can have a look there. There's some partner organisations I think listed now as well. As for the organisations that have been selected to take part in the green zone, to the stakeholder competition, I think I heard Ashley say earlier that that list is not yet available, but she's planning to share it with us very, very shortly. And of course, unless there's any sort of data protection requirements, then we'd be happy to share that further. We'll just double check that we don't want to cut across any GDPR or anything we shouldn't share. Actually, did I miss anything from that? Is there anything you wanted to add in, people who want a list of organisations who are taking part?
Thanks, Chris. No, I think that's fine. As you say, the principal partners are listed on the COP26 website, so you'll be able to look them up there. In terms of organisations selected at the moment, we're just at the shortlisting stage for the expressions of interest exercise. So that process is not yet finalised. So those details will not be publicly available at this stage. We're still talking to organisations who have been shortlisted about their proposals. And then I'm also not sure if you mean, I think there will be lists available from the UN in terms of the blue zone, which is where parties accredited parties to the UN FCCC and accredited organisations are kind of accredited to be part of the blue zone. That information would be available from the UN. But again, I think it's slightly early in the process for that all to have been confirmed at this point.
So might be jumping the gun slightly by the sounds of things, but once those lists are confirmed and sort of the uncertainty is removed, it sounds like the UK government will be in a position to share that list. And of course, as soon as we get that list, we will be sharing it further for those who wish to see it. Thanks for the question. Clive has asked or let us know that the NRW's expression of interest has also been shortlisted. Oh, fantastic. That's really great. It's lovely to hear so many Welsh stakeholders getting through. We're working with all the other UK environmental agencies on the nature-based solution case studies from across Wales and the UK. That's fantastic. And of course, that feeds into the nature-based solution campaign, which is really major for COP. But I think it also complements some of the stuff we'll be putting into the next plan. And of course, as we look forward to next week, stakeholders on the call might be aware that the next climate change risk assessment is due out. That's really important for us. It contains, well, there's two parts to it. There's a technical report, which is, we understand, around 1,000 pages long. So if you want some bedtime reading or have some time to kill, you might want to read every single page. Or if you are a little bit short for time, then it's very helpfully and handily broken down into lots of different chapters that address all the different component parts. So that's going to be a really good reading, I think. And of course, there's a Wales advice summary, which comes from the CCC to accompany that. And nature-based solutions, I'm sure, will be part of what they're talking about. We think about how we tackle the impact of climate change and build our adaptation and our resilience. So thanks for the comment, Clive. Really, really helpful. Tom, lots of likes for this. You mentioned that one of the Wales objectives is sharing and learning. Will there be a process for sharing insights from other countries which are ahead of us in terms of decarbonisation to help us further develop our approach in Wales? It's a really good question, Tom, and I'm really interested actually in those who are on the call, your insights about the best way to do that. Because there'll be lots and lots of different people at COP. There'll be countries who are there, states and regions and subnational countries like us. There'll be businesses, civil society, individuals. There'll be lots and lots of different parties. The Welsh Government will be sort of reaching out on some of the trickiest problems we think we have to tackle to understand the insights from the other countries, find out how other people do things. But of course, there'll be lots and lots of different perspectives. and I guess that we best shared through sort of sectoral engagement forums. That would be my guess. Sort of at the strategic level, I don't think we are planning to sort of publish our insights that we've learned from COP. That would be a slightly funny document. But more on a sort of granular material, what difference does this practically make level? I think if you reach into the relevant part of Welsh Government to which you're interested, then they'd be happy to have a conversation. It's really important, I think, to share those insights. But if you have ideas about how we can do that better or how we could improve that, then really open to hear those. And do pop them in the chat bar, along with any other questions you might have. We've still got sort of 20 minutes or so if we need them. But we can always finish early if you have had your fill of COP for today. And we do hope this session is useful. So any feedback on that is also very gratefully received. Tim Pepin from the WLGA, welcome Tim. Net zero is clearly the right ambition, he says, but will there be scope also to highlight the need for adaptation and climate resilience during and after COP? Absolutely, Tim. I think this is a really important point. Someone once described adaptation to me as the poor cousin of net zero, and I think that was possibly right in some areas, but it's not the right answer. Net zero is hugely important. We absolutely need to get our emissions down, but really beyond that, there's so much more we need to do to tackle the problems we already have. In Climate Conscious Wales, which is our current adaptation plan from the Welsh Government, the technical report explains that by 2080, sea levels in South Wales will have risen by 46 centimetres. Summers will be around 3 degrees warmer, 9% drier, and winters will be in the teens of wetter. So the droughts, the floods, the wildfires, the extreme weather we already see in Wales, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And the information that I mentioned a moment ago, CCRA3, these big reports that are coming next week, will really inform our response to that. I think it's also really important that at COP, although the net zero strategy we're launching is around the same time, we don't lose sight of adaptation and climate resilience. I think it's really, really helpful that it's one of the sort of big UK themes as well. You'll see it coming through very clearly in the campaigns that have been outlined. And of course, we'll be doing our best to highlight those components as well in the Wales response and in COP Cymru. Ashley, I've spoken a little bit about the kind of Welsh perspective on this, but perhaps you could offer a UK perspective on the relative balance and focus on adaptation versus net zero.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, absolutely agree with everything that you said on that, and I think that's recognised in the 4 goals that the COP president has set out for COP26 from a UK presidency perspective, the second of which is adaptation to protect communities and natural habitats. And that's recognising, exactly as Chris said, the fact that climate is already changing, it's going to continue to change even as we reduce emissions, and therefore the need to work together and encourage countries internationally affected by climate change to protect and restore their ecosystems, build defences, warning systems, resilient infrastructure and agriculture, and that obviously, of course, applies equally at home as it does internationally.
Thanks, Ashley. As I say, more to follow on that next week, and I believe the Minister for Climate Change will be making an oral statement next week covering this amongst some other climate-related issues. So watch out for that. Rachel asks, lets us know actually her understanding is the UK farming unions have 2 applications going to the next stage. So again, that's fantastic news and really helpful to know that. Maybe now is a good time to sort of talk about a little about what I see the kind of role the Welsh Government is in COP. We've talked about what the UK Government is doing, what we're doing, but I haven't really said a huge amount about our role. We've had the session today because we wanted to really bring people together, and we see that as our role actually. We're sort of a connecting mechanism, a convening function, and a way to kind of make sure the information is flowing to the right people. As I tried to explain in the presentation, the Welsh Government doesn't have sort of golden tickets to hand out. It doesn't have control of large spaces that it can sort of let people book into. But what we do have is clearly the connection to the UK Government, and it's great Ashley's been able to join us today. And we do have our connection to you. So we're trying to keep information flowing, and where we can and where you let us know, then we can try and connect you with one another and with the right initiatives that are going on across Welsh Government to bring a connected and coordinated and coherent Wales to COP26. And of course, COP Cymru is something we do have a lot more control over. But as I said earlier, we're a little bit away from that yet. We are still working out exactly what we think would add the most value, given our experiences over the last couple of years, which have been great. But do we do more of the same? Do we do something different? And we're really interested in newer stakeholder views to inform that process. So an anonymous person has asked, regarding the tangible outcomes from COP, What are the Welsh Government's top 3 political success criteria? Now, the P word in that sentence means I'm going to struggle to answer that question because I'm not a politician, but I think it's a great question, and it's something the Welsh Government needs to be clear on as we run into COP and as we get a bit closer. So I really do appreciate the question. I'm sorry I can't answer it today, but I think it's something we can be clear about in our comms as we get much closer to the event. Sarah has asked, will Welsh Government be getting involved in the planned Science and Innovation Day at COP? The Learned Society of Wales has been working with other national academies and UKRI on various EOIs, and we're keeping an eye out on opportunities to get involved with this theme. And society could also prompt this within COP Camau as well. A really good idea, really excited about the innovation, the science, the research, the development that's going on in Wales. I am not cited on the Science and Innovation Day at COP. I think the programme for COP is a 2-week programme. As I understand, it's very, very much in draft. Lots of things are still changing, not least because it has to be agreed with the UN, and that hasn't happened yet. So I think although there are themes that are going to be focused on, and perhaps Ashley can comment on this in a moment, I don't think we know exactly what they are or which days they're going to land on. There was a COP call this morning, actually, with ministers. So the new climate change minister, Julie James, was joined by her colleagues from the devolved administrations and the COP president, I think is not a designate anymore. I think he actually is just the COP president, allwch Sharma. And they were talking about how we can make sure we showcase the best of Wales, not just in sort of little corners of COP, but really throughout, and demonstrate that 4th objective, which is that joined up working. So I think the answer is, if there is one, yes, but with the programme still quite fluid, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, although we'll clearly keep in close contact with colleagues in Whitehall. Actually, you might have more to say on that than I do. Perhaps you would care to comment on Sarah's question about the planned Science and Innovation Day.
Thanks, Beth. No, I don't think, I think you set it out well. I don't think there's anything more that I can add at this stage. As you say, the kind of 2-week programme is still being kind of confirmed, finalised, sorted out. So nothing more specifically to add on that at this stage. Yeah, he's COP president designate. It's a really kind of techie civil servancy term, because he's COP president designate until COP starts. Because we're not currently the presidency, our presidency as the UK doesn't actually start until COP starts. So it's, we're still with the Chileans at the moment, so that's why he's designate. But I'm sure nobody else needs to worry about any of that other than us. Thank you.
Sounds like the Olympics, we sort of, when you light the flame, suddenly that country becomes the Olympic host. I think that's when the moment of transition occurs, because the moment before that's just a sort of torch is moving around, isn't it? So perhaps it's the same for COP. Who knew?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley. So Brett has asked about the approach to engagement with businesses Welsh Government takes in the lead up to COP. Is there a plan for coordination of policy between the Minister for Economy and Climate Change? So taking the second part of that first, I think the answer is definitely yes. There's definitely aspiration and plans in place to bring together all the different components of the climate change agenda, and that can be seen really, I think, in this government's decision to reorganise the cabinet with climate change at its heart. 2 new ministers appointed, bringing together a lot of the key sectors, so planning, energy, transport, the environment. Might be another one I should know is housing. Oh, I feel like I'm in a sort of quick fire quiz. They've all been brought together in the new sort of super ministry to make sure there's proper integration. And of course, the economy is a key part of that as well. So I understand there's very much plans in place to bring the policy of those different areas much closer together under the new administration. And in terms of the approach to engaging with businesses, again, I think it's just sort of being open, as I was saying earlier, how we can sort of convene and link people together. But that partly depends on you guys telling us what you're up to, as well as telling you what we know and how we can connect you into the opportunities that we know are coming up. So I think we'll try and be as open, keep information flowing. But in general, I think the Welsh Government approach is to try and use existing forums, existing engagement events to share this information rather than setting up bespoke things just for the next few months. We want to piggyback on all the good relationships that already exist in different sectors and with different partners. I think there's also, and Ashley might want to come in this, a sort of business champion role. Andrew Griffiths MP for the UK government has had this sort of business engagement lead role. That's only been very recently announced though. My knowledge on that is a little bit patchy, so I might hand to Ashley to see if she wants to say anything else. It's not the Welsh Government as you asked, Brett, John, but it might be of relevance to your question, given it's about business engagement in COP. Ashley, can you give us a little bit more about, is it Andrew Griffiths' role?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew Griffith MP has been appointed by the Prime Minister to be the net zero business champion. And I know that he's been engaging with a wide range of businesses across all parts of the UK, particularly together with the high-level champion, Nigel Topping, who, Chris, you referenced earlier, particularly, as I said, encouraging businesses to sign up to the Race to Zero, which Kate spoke about earlier, which Chris spoke about earlier, which is one of the kind of key ways that we're asking businesses to get involved in the drive towards achieving net zero. So if you haven't kind of checked that out, do definitely have a look at the Race to Zero. Yeah, thanks.
It's a really good point, actually. I think the Race to Zero is a really good way for businesses to kind of demonstrate their engagement. But equally, if you want to pledge, if you're a business in Wales, to be part of our plan, I'm sure the Business and Industrial Chapter, our emissions reductions chapter, would be really, really pleased to hear from you. There's quite a bit to do, and business is going to be key to that. Now, my questions are just refreshed. Let me re-find where I was. Oh, it's a question about young people. So how are young people able to be involved in the Italy Youth COP, but also COP26? Well, there's quite a few ways they can get involved. There's clearly, from the UK perspective, they've been running a campaign called Together for Our Planet. There are a number of competitions that have been run over the last kind of few weeks. I think there's a couple that are live now. There's an art competition, which is won by a wee girl up in Scotland. But it's currently a Blue Peter competition, which is all part of COP26, which is looking for, I think, a young poet to put down in writing their kind of view about what we need to do to tackle climate change. I think the plan is then for Aardman animations. I think maybe the Morph people or possibly the Walls and Gromit people to set that to some kind of animation, and that will be shown as part of the COP26 celebration. So there's, or celebrations summit. So I think there's opportunities there through that sort of thing and those kind of competitions for young people to get involved. Additionally, Wales runs mock COPs, which we can give sort of more information out. That's bringing young people together to really discuss and start to interrogate some of the major issues around climate change, both building understanding and awareness, but also sort of building their engagement with the topic and hopefully influencing sort of long-term behavioural change, which is more sustainable, as well as the influence they're going to have on people who live with them and work with them, who teach them. And it's really important, I think, to engage young people and put climate change further up the radar. There will, I think, be other bits and pieces that come out. I know that we're doing a lot with our Eco Skills programme around this, and of course there's a pack which I think has been launched just today on COP26 by the UK government. And again, Ashley, I might want to come in and just give us a little bit more detail about that pack, which I think is the UK government lead, but has been shared with some Welsh stakeholders as well. Ashley, can you say a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so the Together for Our Planet Schools pack we have launched today. Hopefully it's available online. The materials are available online to be downloaded and to be used by children and young people about kind of how they can get involved in climate change, what does climate change mean for them. So I think that's really a useful resource that we can kind of signpost towards. We're also developing additional packs that will be available for other stakeholders, particularly kind of in the civil society space. We're really keen, as Chris, to make sure that young people are involved in the COP process, and there will be a number of opportunities at the summit. COP President also, for example, chairs a roundtable that meets every couple of months with civil society groups, including youth groups, and then a number of youth groups are involved in that as part of that process.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And actually, I've just been reminded by a colleague on the mock COP programme that I mentioned a moment ago. There's actually 4 events that are planned over the next 6 months. One specifically at COP26. So if you want to check out sizeofwales.org.uk, they've got a section on sort of mock COPs. Have a Google, have a look. And you want to get involved, then I think it's probably the best way to do so. So that's https or www.sizeofwales.org.uk, and they've got more information on those mock COPs I mentioned just a moment ago. Thank you very much, moderator team. Last couple of questions now, and I think we're probably going to have to wrap up. I know that time is slipping away. We've had a comment in from Paul. National Parks UK are working with the Palladium Group on net zero, and a lovely link there. submitting this for attendance COP26. Fantastic. It sounds really interesting, and I'll check that link out after this session. Tony, can you say a bit more about the finance theme? At Dura Cymru, we've made a pledge that we will move to total net zero by 2040. Fantastic. I was really pleased when I read that recently. But this requires significant investment. Without investment, you can't meet these targets, and this will probably be the same for other sector industries. I might again turn to Ashley for the finance theme, because it's a sort of UK-led thing, but I understand the focus is quite internationally orientated. It's more about sort of helping developing countries in particular, and those with very, very high either carbon footprints or with particularly significant challenges when it comes to climate adaptation, about how we mobilise that. It's also about how to mobilise, I think, and leverage private sector investment. So, for example, how you convince pension schemes to stop investing in oil companies, for example, and how you sort of switch the sort of banking system to a much greener mindset. So I think the point about you needing investment to get to where you want to be is absolutely right. I think the finance theme does touch on that, but it's much, much wider as well. Ashley might have more to say on that. She's a bit closer to this than I am.
Yes, sure, absolutely. As you say, Chris, the focus of the finance campaign is really global to help support of the first two goals around ambition and adaptation. Developed countries need to make good on the promises that they have made to mobilise $100 billion in climate finance by the year 2020. I'm not sure that year is right, to mobilise climate finance. So that is the focus of the finance campaign, encouraging developed countries and international financial institutions to play their part in mobilising that funding.
Thanks, Ashley. I think we need the last couple of points and then we'll need to wrap up because we are running out of time, unfortunately. Clive, I think from NRW asks, Welsh Government ministers have attended past COPs. Will this be the case this year? We very much hope so, Clive. Clearly that'll be down to the minister's diary close to the time, but I can't imagine there'll be very much that trumps this in terms of importance to the government's agenda. Clearly I can't commit the minister ahead of that, but I think our advice would be, or my personal view would be that I think that would probably be a good idea. So expect to see them up in Glasgow, COVID permitting. I mentioned earlier about COVID and I didn't really come back to it in the way that I had planned to. At the moment, the plan from the UK government, and Ashley might again want to come in this, but I'll just check with her at the end if she wants to say anything additional, is for COP to go ahead in person in Glasgow, but there are contingency plans, I think, being developed if that's not the case. COP was sort of cancelled last year, it was postponed. I do not think that will be the case this year. That's a personal view, but I'm happy to share that. So I think it's worth sort of keeping our eyes open and being alive to that, and what any sort of COVID implications might be. But I think the event will still go ahead sort of in reality and in person, although perhaps there'll be some virtual components, TBC, and that really depends on how the COVID situation plays out. That's my perspective. Ashley might have something to add to that. Ashley?
Sure. I mean, just to agree with what you said, Chris, absolutely our ministers are committed to delivering COP26 in November in Glasgow in person. Not least, many negotiators, many parties to the UNFCCC have told us how important it is to be able to negotiate in person, particularly parties from the global south who have felt in past COPs that perhaps their voice has not been heard as strongly as it ought to have been. So ministers are committed to an in-person COP. Obviously, protecting the health, well-being and safety of the delegates and of the local community is absolutely foremost in our minds and in our planning. And so we are looking at what measures need to be implemented to make sure that it can be a COVID-safe event. But absolutely the plan is to go ahead with an in-person event.
Fingers crossed. And just finally, Sam saying similar call to this for biodiversity COP15 would be great. And then questions about is the Welsh Government going to have a presence there? How does Climate Camau have a presence there? And it's really important that it's not overlooked being so close to COP26. I think it's actually really helpful that it's quite close. It sort of builds more momentum. There's such an interlinked agenda there between biodiversity and climate change. But there is a risk as well. And I think it's reasonable to point that out. We will pass that feedback on to our biodiversity colleagues who we work very closely with and see what they can come up with. It's bang on 4 o'clock, so at that point I think we're going to close the Q&A. Thanks all for joining. It was really good to have so many people on the line, and I wish you a very good rest of your afternoon. Diolch yn fawr, and take care. Thanks all. Goodbye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks Ashley.
Bye-bye.